Baltimore, Maryland, May 1953. A humid evening settles over the Harbor District. 19-year-old Opal Hartley walks through the loading yards, clutching her worn leather purse containing a week's wages, $17 and change. 8 men emerge from behind shipping containers, moving with the cold certainty of those who've traveled all the way from Newark for one purpose: to settle a score. The girl stops, understanding there's nowhere to run. Then a lone figure steps from the shadows. A 43-year-old man with a stevedore's hands and the eyes of someone who survived the chosen reservoir. He positions himself between the girl and the 8 men. No words, no threats. He simply stands. What happens in the next few minutes will become one of those stories never recorded in Baltimore's official post-war chronicles. There are events the newspapers never covered, stories whispered in diner booths, in boarding house hallways, behind warehouse loading bays. Those who were there in May of '53 say something happened at the Port Terminal 7 that changed many lives. The story of Harlan Thorne is one that makes you consider the price of human decency and what a man will do to protect the only thing that gives his existence meaning. If you're loving the content, make sure to subscribe right now so you don't miss us in your recommendations. We upload new, exciting videos every day. Thank you for watching. Let's get into it. Baltimore, May 1953. A city that 8 years ago celebrated VJ Day now grapples with its aftermath. On street corners, war veterans with medals pinned to faded Eisenhower jackets. In stores, lines for rationed goods finally easing. At the harbor terminals, a daily struggle between those trying to make an honest living and those who chose another path. Warehouse Terminal 7 sat in the industrial waterfront district where the streetcar lines ended and freight yards began. Among pallets of lumber and crates of machinery worked a man whose past few knew. Harlan Thorne, 43 years old, 6 feet even, hands capable of hefting 200-pound crates single-handedly, and eyes that made even the toughest dock rats keep their distance. A longshoreman's wage came to $62 a week. Not much, but sufficient for a solitary man. Thorne lived in a boarding house 3 blocks from the terminal, a 12-by-10 room with an iron bed, a card table, 1 chair. On the wall, a single photograph, his Marine Raider Battalion, taken in late '43 before the Tarawa landing. Of the 14 men in that photo, only he remained alive. Fellow boarders learned not to make noise when screams echoed from his room at night. Everyone understood. The man was fighting ghosts and losing the war every night. Every morning at 5:15, Harlan Thorne woke 1 minute before his alarm clock, a habit from Marine reconnaissance training. His internal clock ran more accurately than any timepiece. He washed with cold water from a basin, shaved with a straight razor while staring into a cracked mirror reflecting a face etched with deep lines and a scar across his left jaw, a memento from hand-to-hand combat on Saipan. Breakfast never varied: black coffee, 2 slices of white bread, margarine. By 5:45 he was walking through empty streets toward Terminal 7. Those who knew him recalled that Thorne stood apart from other longshoremen. Not in appearance. Plenty of tough men worked the docks. The difference lay elsewhere, in how he moved, soundlessly, as if stalking prey even in broad daylight. How his head snapped toward sudden noises, instantaneous, predatory. How he looked through people as if reading their thoughts. The shift foreman, Sal Moretti, himself a Normandy veteran, once remarked, "That one didn't just fight. He did things in the war they don't put in newsreels." Thorne worked in silence. Per shift he moved more cargo than 2 younger men. Lumber, machinery parts, barrels of chemicals all passed through his hands. When other longshoremen collapsed at day's end, he stayed behind, helping security check padlocks on warehouses. Whether they paid him extra or not didn't matter. Just habit. In combat, those who didn't check perimeters didn't survive long. In the terminal cafeteria, Thorne always sat with his back to the wall, facing the entrance. He ate quickly, mechanically, tasting nothing. Meatloaf for 75 cents, mashed potatoes for 35, coffee for a dime. This irritated other workers. The man seemed to wall himself off. Attempts at conversation met with terse responses. Invitations for drinks after shift, polite refusals. Thorne existed in his own world, admitting no one. But spring of '53 changed everything. A new employee arrived at the terminal, 19-year-old Opal Hartley. A war orphan, like thousands of others. Father killed at Anzio. Mother died of tuberculosis in '46. The girl got hired in the terminal office to file invoices for $17 a week. Quiet, unnoticeable, with large gray eyes holding the sorrow of a stolen childhood. Those eyes caught Thorne's attention her first day, and something stirred in his stone heart, something he thought had died with his battalion on Tarawa. It started small. Thorne began appearing at the office with various errands from the foreman, carrying heavy file boxes that younger workers could have managed, quietly straightening folders sliding from desks. Once, when Opal worked late on accounts, he silently walked her to the bus stop, staying 10 paces behind. The girl turned, wanting to speak, but saw his expression, the look of a man guarding the one precious thing remaining in his world. This continued for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of strange, wordless protection. Other terminal workers whispered, but Thorne didn't care. For the first time in 8 years since the war, he had a reason to wake up mornings. But just then, real trouble found the terminal. The racket arrives. Opal Hartley started at Terminal 7 on Monday, May 3rd. Those present remembered the day differently, but all agreed on one thing. The girl looked like she was begging for charity, not applying for work. A dress, altered from surplus military fabric, scuffed pre-war shoes, a canvas bag holding her documents. Office manager Vernon Buckley, a heavy-set man with a perpetually flushed face, sized her up and grunted. "You can type? Handle figures? Fine, you're hired. $17 a week. Lunch at your own expense." The office occupied a wood frame addition to the main warehouse. 4 desks buried under invoices, manifests, receipts, the smell of carbon paper, dust, and cafeteria cabbage. They placed Opal in the far corner by a window overlooking the loading docks. Her first days she worked, barely lifting her head, transcribing numbers from one ledger to another, operating an adding machine, checking invoices. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from the constant internal tension of someone accustomed to disaster striking at any moment. Through that window, Thorne first saw her face in daylight. He was unloading boxcars, mechanically shouldering 100-pound crates when his gaze happened across the office window. The girl sat hunched over paperwork, sunlight illuminating her profile. Delicate features, hollow cheeks, shadows beneath her eyes from malnutrition and sleepless nights. But it wasn't beauty that struck him. Pretty girls weren't scarce in post-war Baltimore. It was her expression. Thorne had seen that look on children in liberated villages, those who'd survived occupation, lost everyone, and continued living simply because they hadn't died. That day, Thorne did something he hadn't done in 8 years. After his shift, instead of heading straight to the boarding house, he stopped at the corner grocery on Dock Street, stood before the meager selection, finally purchased a can of condensed milk for 95 cents, nearly a day's wages. Next morning, the can appeared on Opal's desk, hidden under yesterday's Baltimore sun. No one saw how it got there. The office was empty. The workday hadn't started. Opal looked around, confused, but found no one. This continued for a week. An apple appeared beside her typewriter, a fresh roll in waxed paper, a small bag of peppermint candies. Opal understood who left these gifts. She noticed Thorne checking discreetly whether she'd taken each offering. Once their eyes met through the window, the girl smiled faintly and nodded. "Thank you." Thorne turned away as if caught doing something shameful, but in the corners of his eyes appeared creases from a smile that hadn't surfaced in years. Terminal workers began noticing changes. The sullen, silent longshoreman became not talkative, but something shifted in his movements, the set of his shoulders. Foreman Sal Moretti remarked at lunch, "Look at Thorne. It's like the man came back to life. Been walking around like a ghost. Figured he'd just keel over one day." Other longshoremen exchanged glances but said nothing. Everyone understood what was happening and, in their way, approved. At a terminal where every day was a fight for survival, any display of humanity held special value. But this awakening humanity attracted attention from those to whom it posed an obstacle. Because Opal had caught someone else's eye besides the former Marine raider. The Newark crew. The racket appeared at the terminal in mid-May, when magnolias in Baltimore's parks had finished blooming and the air filled with approaching summer's humidity. The operation belonged to a man named Vincent Knuckles Carbone, a wiry man in his mid-30s with a mangled left hand, fingers bent at unnatural angles from a warehouse accident everyone suspected wasn't accidental. Carbone didn't come alone. He brought 6 others, 3 local punks and 3 imports from North Jersey. They set up in a condemned row house across from the terminal, perfect for watching all entrances and exits. First contact came Friday, May 20th, payday. Longshoremen lined up at the paymaster's window when 3 men walked through the terminal gates. Strolled casual, hands in pockets, stopped in the middle of the loading bay. Carbone pulled out a Lucky Strike, took his time lighting it, surveyed the territory with an appraising eye. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Listen up, working men. As of today, this terminal operates under our protection. The friendly rate is 10% of your paycheck." "The unfriendly rate," he didn't finish, just smiled, revealing gold-capped teeth. The first to refuse were 2 young longshoremen, guys in their early 20s, fresh from Ohio looking for work. That evening they got jumped in an alley. One suffered broken ribs, the other a shattered nose. Next day, both showed up for work. No choice. If you don't work, you don't eat. But now, collecting their pay, they silently counted out $6 for protection. Others followed their example. Some from fear, some from calculation. Better to lose 10% than 100% plus your health. Thorne refused to pay. When one of Carbone's muscle approached him, a scrawny punk called Needles, and held out his hand for the take, the longshoreman didn't even turn his head, kept stacking crates as if no one stood there. Needles tried grabbing his shoulder. Next second, he was on the ground, doubled over in pain. Thorne hadn't punched him, just caught the wrist and twisted it in a particular way, a combat technique. "Tell your boss if he wants his cut, he can come collect it himself," Thorne said, returning to work. That evening, Carbone came personally, brought 4 men with him. They formed a semicircle, cutting off Thorne's retreat. Carbone played with a switchblade, tossing it hand to hand, psychological intimidation that worked on most people. But Thorne looked at him like he could see through every cheap trick and posture. "You think you're tough, huh? War hero, I bet. Got medals?" Carbone's voice dripped mock respect. Thorne said nothing. "Silent type? Smart move. But here's the thing, hero. The war's over. New rules now. Either you pay or..." He flicked the knife blade open. What happened next took under 3 seconds. Thorne stepped forward into the group. His movements were so fast and precise that watching longshoremen couldn't later explain what exactly occurred. Carbone ended up face first against a container wall, his own knife pressed to his throat. His 4 backup froze, uncertain whether to attack. Thorne leaned close to the gangster's ear and spoke, enunciating each word. "I've killed men like you with my bare hands. In the dark. Quietly. Disappear from this terminal. This is your only warning." He released Carbone, turned, and walked away without looking back. The thugs stood there, stunned. But Thorne underestimated one thing. For a racketeer, losing face meant losing everything. Carbone couldn't just walk away. He needed to restore his reputation, and he chose the most cowardly method. Hit what the enemy valued. Everyone at the terminal knew what the silent longshoreman valued. The hunt for Opal began. May 27, 1953. Thursday started the way it would end, with violence. A light rain turned the loading bay into a mess of mud and sawdust. Opal arrived early, needing to finish quarterly reports. The office was empty except for the night watchman dozing in his cubicle. She sat down, spread out her papers, began calculating. The adding machine's mechanical clicking measured the final minutes of peace. At 7:30, the door banged open. Two men entered, Needles and another from Carbone's crew, a hulking brute called Ox. They positioned themselves on either side of Opal's desk. The girl looked up. Fear flashed in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "Office opens at 8. Come back later." Needles smirked, reached out and swept a stack of carefully tallied invoices to the floor. Papers scattered. "You coming with us, sweetheart? Mr. Carbone wants to discuss your guardian angel." Opal pressed back in her chair, understanding that if she went with them now, she might not return, or return in a condition worse than death. Ox stepped closer, reaching for her shoulder, and in that moment, Harlan Thorne appeared in the doorway. He stood silently, blocking the exit, holding a pry bar used for opening jammed freight car doors. Rain dripped from his face, but he didn't blink, fixing the thugs with that same stare that made Japanese sentries freeze in 43. "Step away from the girl." Thorne's voice was quiet but carried a force that made Needles involuntarily step back. Ox seemed bolder or stupider. He pulled a knife from his belt, lunged at Thorne. What happened next, Opal would remember for the rest of her life, though it lasted mere seconds. Thorne didn't retreat. He stepped into the attack, sliding off the blade's line. The pry bar in his hands described a short arc. Crack of breaking wrist bone. The knife clattered to the floor. Second strike to the knee. Ox collapsed, screaming, clutching his leg. Needles tried to run, but Thorne was faster, grabbed him by the collar, spun him around, headbutted him in the nose. Blood fountained. Thorne stood over the two writhing bodies, breathing evenly, as if he hadn't just crippled two grown men. He turned to Opal. "Pack your things. Today you're taking a cab home. I'll escort you." Then he bent down to Needles, who was pressing bloodied hands to his shattered nose. "Tell Carbone this was his final warning. Anyone touches the girl again, I won't be this merciful. The war taught me to kill quickly and quietly. All 7 of you. One night, that's all I'd need." News of the incident spread through the terminal within an hour. Longshoremen whispered, but there was no condemnation. Many were veterans themselves. They understood Thorne was defending what he considered his, and in their world, you stood up for your own to the last. Terminal manager Paul Decker called Thorne to his office, but the conversation was brief. "Harlan, I didn't see or hear anything, but if the cops come asking, I'll have to let you go without severance." Thorne nodded and left, but everyone understood this wasn't over. Carbone wouldn't forgive this humiliation. Now it wasn't about money or reputation. Now it was about blood. And blood would be spilled. The only questions were whose and when. Thorne knew this better than anyone. That night he made a decision that could cost him his life, but might save Opal's. He would go into the wolf's den. Alone. The night raid. The night of May 27th to 28th was oppressive. Baltimore suffocated under humid heat that promised thunderstorms. In the basement of the condemned row house on Dock Street, where Carbone's crew had set up, the air was especially stifling. 4 gangsters played poker by kerosene lamplight. A bottle of bootleg whiskey made the rounds. Carbone sat in the corner, honing his switchblade against a leather strop. Rage had been building in him all day. Humiliation at the terminal, 2 men in the hospital, his reputation in tatters. "Tomorrow morning we go in force," he growled, not looking up. "We take Thorne quiet when he leaves the terminal." And the girl, he didn't finish, but everyone understood. The basement door was bolted from inside. The single window near the ceiling was boarded shut. The thugs felt secure. They were wrong. At 2:47 a.m. the lights went out. Someone had cut the power line outside. The kerosene lamp flickered and died as if extinguished by an invisible draft. In the pitch darkness, Thorne's voice emerged. "I came to finish what I started." What happened in the next 38 seconds can only be reconstructed from evidence and later statements. The gangsters jumped up, lunged toward the voice, but Thorne was already elsewhere. A strike, crack of breaking jaw, a scream, the thud of a falling body. Someone tried reaching the door. Useless. The bolt had been jammed from outside. Shadows thrashed in darkness, sounds of impacts, groans, curses. Thorne moved silently, striking with precision at vulnerable points, techniques perfected during years of night raids behind enemy lines. Carboni attempted organizing a defense, shouted for his men to form back-to-back, but in total darkness, in panic, it proved impossible. Thorne struck methodically, calculatingly, not killing, crippling. Breaking arms, dislocating knees, choking until unconsciousness. One thug, called Skinny, tried smashing the boarded window, jumped, grabbed the planks. Next instant, Thorne's hand clamped on his ankle, yanked down. The fall, crack of dislocated shoulder. When silence fell, a match scratched. In the flickering light lay 4 crumpled forms, moaning, writhing, unable to stand. Carboni slumped against the wall, cradling a broken arm. Thorne crouched before him. "Now listen carefully. By morning, you all disappear from Baltimore. Forever. If any of you show up within a mile of that terminal or that girl, I'll find you. And next time, there'll be no mercy." In the war, I cleared out an enemy position in one night. 8 men, silent, with a knife. You're 7. For me, that's a warm-up. Thorne stood, headed for the exit. At the door he paused without turning. "And don't visit Needles and Ox in the hospital. My Marine buddies are watching. Try revenge, they'll tell me, and I'll come back and finish what I didn't finish tonight." He left. Heavy footsteps faded. In the basement remained only groans and the smell of fear. Morning of May 28th, neighbors found the basement door open. Inside, signs of a struggle, blood, but not a single person. Carboni's crew had vanished from Baltimore as suddenly as they'd appeared. Word was a pickup truck had arrived at dawn, loaded several men unable to walk independently. Where they were taken, nobody knew or wanted to know. At the terminal, what happened during Thorne's night visit wasn't discussed aloud, but everyone understood. Attitude toward the silent longshoreman changed. Now they regarded him with a mixture of respect and fear, a man capable of single-handedly taking down an entire gang. But Thorne understood what others didn't. Carbone was small-time. Behind him stood more serious people, and they wouldn't forgive this. He'd started something that wouldn't end well. The Newark Enforcers. The crew from Newark arrived in Baltimore on June 2nd, Tuesday. 8 men, each with a resume that made even hardened Baltimore criminals nervous. The leader, Mickey the Butcher Delano, a 42-year-old enforcer who'd done 12 years at Sing Sing. They said he was the only survivor of the '47 Attica riot. With him came 7 hand-picked enforcers, not street punks, but genuine killers who'd survived prison and war, sometimes fighting on sides that didn't earn medals. They didn't hole up in a flop house, but rented rooms in a decent hotel downtown. They had money. The East Coast Syndicate had funded this operation to restore order. Because this wasn't about Carbone and his humiliated crew anymore. It was about principle. If some longshoreman could destroy racketeers with impunity, others would follow his example. The system would crack, and that couldn't be allowed. First 2 days, the Newark crew studied the territory, walking singly or in pairs, memorizing routes, learning the terminal schedule, tracking Opal's movements, gathering intel on Thorn, who he was, where from, who he associated with. Information was scarce. War veteran, Marine raider, closed off after discharge. No friends, no enemies until recently. A perfect target. Nobody would avenge his death. Except one thing troubled them: how easily he'd handled the local crew. That meant he wasn't just any veteran. He was the type they'd dropped behind enemy lines for a week with nothing but a knife and a pound of explosives. Few of those existed, and most hadn't survived to victory. Those who did? June 3rd. Delano gathered his men in their hotel room, spread a hand-drawn map on the table, marked key points with X's. The terminal, Thorn's boarding house, Opal's apartment building, the bus stop, the empty lot by the freight yards. "We take the girl," he stated flatly. "Thorn will come to us. We do this publicly so word spreads. 8 men against 1 girl, and nobody dared interfere. Fear is our best weapon. We work her over good, make an example. Thorn gets taken out quick and clean so he can't react. Then the bodies go on a freight car to the Jersey Pine Barrens. No trace. No questions. The plan was simple, reliable, tested. But Delano didn't account for one thing. Thorn didn't fight by mob rules. He fought by rules of war. In war, you study your enemy, anticipate their moves, set traps. All week while the Newark crew studied him, Thorn studied them. He knew where they stayed, knew their faces, habits, routines, knew Delano had a bad leg, an old prison injury that made him limp slightly left. Knew 2 of the 7 were former collaborators who'd worked with Nazis during occupation. Knew one of them, called Pops, had participated in reprisal actions against resistance fighters. This information mattered. Several longshoremen at the terminal were ex-resistance fighters from occupied countries. They wouldn't forgive if they found out. June 4th, the day of the planned hit, Delano made one mistake. He decided to take the girl in public, in daylight, so rumors would spread through all Baltimore. 8 men against 1 girl, and nobody intervened. Fear, the mob's primary weapon. By 4 p.m., the enforcers had taken positions. 3 hiding in freight containers left of the lot, 3 right, 2, including Delano, by the old signal tower in the lot's center. They waited, knowing Opal was working late today. A bribed cleaning woman from the terminal had tipped them off. The girl was finishing monthly reports. She'd leave around 6, when the lot would be deserted. Perfect timing. At 5:47, in one of the containers, tarp rustled. Out crawled a bloodied man, one of the Newark crew. Scar tried to shout, but blood poured from his mouth instead of sound. He collapsed face first into gravel. The others went on alert, but too late. Thorn was already among them, not outside their formation, but inside it. How he got there, through which gap, they had no time to find answers. The second enforcer standing in the adjacent container didn't even turn around. Strike from behind to the base of the skull with rebar. The body went limp. The third tried pulling a knife. Thorn caught his wrist, twisted it, slashed his own tendons with his own blade. A scream echoed across the lot. The remaining 5 rushed to help, but Thorn had vanished, dissolved between containers like a ghost. Delano roared, "Stay together! Back to back!" But panic was already spreading. This wasn't a fight, it was a hunt, and they weren't the hunters. A shadow flickered between containers. Pops charged that way with a crowbar. Sound of impact, silence. Pops didn't return. The 4 remaining clustered in the lot's center. Then Opal walked into the clearing. She saw them, stopped. Delano grinned. At least something was going according to plan. He stepped toward the girl, and in that moment, Thorn materialized between them. appeared as if rising from the earth itself, empty-handed, covered in blood, other people's blood. His eyes were vacant, dead, the eyes of a man who'd already made his decision and would see it through to the end. 4 of yours are down, Thorne stated evenly. You're 4 against me alone. Not bad odds. But I'll give you a choice. Leave now, stay alive. Try touching the girl, I'll kill you all. Not disable like your buddies. Kill, like I killed Japs in 43. Quietly and permanently. All 4 of you. Won't take me long. Delano looked at his men. Fear showed in their eyes, accustomed to inspiring terror, not experiencing it. But there was no choice. Retreating meant losing everything. Delano nodded to his crew, and they rushed Thorne as one. What followed would enter Baltimore's criminal legends as the Freight Yard Massacre. 6 p.m., June 4th, 1953. Baltimore lived its ordinary life. Downtown, couples strolled through parks enjoying the last warm spring days. At Lexington Market, vendors closed up shop, counting the day's take. In boarding houses, landladies prepared dinner, clattering pots in communal kitchens. Nobody knew that at this very moment, in the freight yards by the harbor, a drama was unfolding that would determine several people's fates. A drama with no winners, only survivors and corpses. Opal had left the terminal office at 6:13. The monthly report was finally complete, 40 pages of meticulous figures, each needing to balance to the penny. Her hands ached from typing, eyes burned from exhaustion. She paused on the steps, adjusted her headscarf. Evening air was warm, smelling of honeysuckle from an abandoned garden behind the warehouses. An ordinary June evening. Except something felt wrong. Too quiet. Even the longshoreman who usually smoked by the gates had disappeared, and birds were silent, not a single sparrow's chirp, though hundreds typically gathered here. Night watchman Eddie glanced out from his booth, looked at Opal with a strange expression, opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. Just shook his head and withdrew. The girl shrugged and headed toward the exit. The gates stood open, massive, iron-plated doors usually locked precisely at 6. Strange. Opal walked onto the street, turned right toward the freight yards. The bus stop was a 15-minute walk. She'd made this trip hundreds of times, knew every pothole, every rusted spur track, every leaning telephone pole. The lot greeted her with unusual emptiness. Normally people were here, workers from the nearby factory cutting through to the bus, local boys playing among freight cars, old Abe the ragman hauling his cart. But now, not a soul. Just wind stirring newspaper scraps and the distant clank of coupling cars. Opal quickened her pace. Anxiety rose inside, that same feeling that had saved her when she was homeless, helping her sense when to run from another police sweep. She'd covered a third of the distance when movement caught her eye. Left side, from a rusted boxcar labeled Grain, emerged a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, cap pulled low. Then another, a third. Right side, shadows stirred too. Opal stopped. Her heart pounded so loudly it seemed audible across the lot. 8 men slowly, deliberately converged on the lot's center where she stood, a 19-year-old girl with a week's wages in her worn purse. Those present later reported that many witnessed this scene from windows overlooking the lot. Saw, but didn't intervene. Fear paralyzed even those who might have helped in other circumstances. 8 grown men against 1 girl. Interfere, and tomorrow they'd find your body in the harbor. Better to turn away, pull the curtains, pretend nothing was happening. Safer that way. The Newark crew's leader, Delano, walked in front, unhurried, swaggering, displaying complete confidence in his impunity. His right hand held a switchblade, not concealed, held openly. The others spread in a semicircle, professionally, expertly, ensuring the victim couldn't break through in any direction. Opal stepped back, Then again, her spine hitting the rusted side of a freight car. Nowhere to go. "Well, sweetheart?" Delano's voice was unexpectedly soft, almost gentle. "Been expecting us, I bet. Your protector warned you we were coming. Only I don't see him anywhere. Ran off, probably." They're all like that, these heroes, till it comes to real fighting. He took another step forward, the others closing in, tightening the noose. Opal stayed silent, throat dry, tongue stuck to her palate. She wanted to scream, but understood it was useless. Even if someone heard, they wouldn't come. Thoughts raced through her mind. She hadn't said goodbye to her boarding house neighbor, never visited her mother's grave in Pennsylvania. Thorne had been right. She should have left town. But oddly, fear suddenly receded. In its place came fatalistic calm. If she was meant to die today, so be it. The important thing was not to show them fear, not to give them that satisfaction. And in that moment, when 5 feet separated them, when she could already make out tattoos on Delano's arms and smell liquor on the nearest enforcer's breath, the unexpected happened. From beneath the freight car, literally from under Opal's feet, a figure rose. Slowly, as if the earth was birthing a man. Thorne, covered in dust and soot, a twig stuck in his hair. He'd lain under that car for who knows how long, waiting for this moment. He stood between Opal and the Newark crew. Silently, without a word, just stood and looked at Delano with that same stare that in 43 made Japanese sentries start praying to gods they didn't believe in. 8 seconds of absolute silence. Even the wind died as if nature held its breath. 8 men with knives and crowbars against one unarmed man. The outcome seemed predetermined. Yet something about Thorne's posture, the set of his head, said this man wasn't surrendering. He'd come to die and would take as many enemies with him as possible. And judging by what happened to 4 enforcers earlier, he was capable of much. Delano recovered first from the surprise, grinned, shook his head with feigned admiration. "Well, you're something, Thorne. Rising from the ground like in a war movie." He signaled his men. They began slowly fanning out, encircling Thorne and Opal from all sides, professionally, unhurried. Each knew his place in this deadly dance. "But here's the thing, hero," Delano continued. "The movie's over. Now real life begins. And in it, you're gonna die like a dog." "And the girl?" He licked his lips, not finishing. Thorne still said nothing, only turned his head slightly, tracking enemy movement with peripheral vision. His hands hung loosely at his sides, but those who understood fighting saw he was ready to move instantly, like a coiled spring about to release. Opal behind him pressed against the car, trying not to breathe, understanding that everything would be decided now. Either they'd walk out alive or she tried not to complete that thought. "You know what we did to your buddies," Delano continued, clearly trying to rattle Thorne. 4 down. 1 probably won't make it. You damaged something vital inside. He's coughing blood, but that's nothing compared to what's waiting for you. We won't kill you quick. First, you'll watch us have fun with the girl, all 7 of us, one after another. Then..." He didn't finish. Thorne moved, not ran, moved in that strange flowing motion taught only at specialized OSS training camps for deep reconnaissance operatives. Delano didn't comprehend what happened. 1 second, Thorne was 15 feet away. The next, beside him. Elbow strike to solar plexus. Delano doubled over, gasping for air. The switchblade fell from loosened fingers. Thorne caught it mid-fall, in one motion hurled it at the nearest enforcer. The blade entered precisely in the shoulder joint. The arm went limp. The remaining 6 charged simultaneously, but Thorne had already rolled backward, using the bent-over Delano as a shield. A crowbar whistled where his head had been a second before. Counterstrike, knee to groin. A howl. Collapse. 5 still standing. Thorne circled among them, not allowing complete encirclement, striking in short, economical blows, elbows, knees, edge of hand, palm heel, every strike calculated to the millimeter. This fighting style was taught only in military intelligence, where one imprecise blow meant death. But the Newark crew weren't street punks. They knew how to fight, and there were too many. Too many for one man, however well-trained. The first knife caught Thorne after 3 minutes of combat. The blade slid along his ribs, leaving a long gash. Blood stained his shirt. Thorne didn't even flinch, kept fighting with the same methodical fury. Broke one man's arm, shattered another's knee, but the odds were unequal. The second strike hit his thigh. His leg buckled. Thorne dropped to one knee. The enforcers sensed weakness, rushed to finish him. Then the unexpected happened. From behind an adjacent freight car ran 3 men, longshoremen from the terminal. Foreman Sal Moretti with a crowbar and 2 young workers. The same ones beaten by Carbone's crew on day 1. They'd witnessed everything from terminal windows, hesitated long, but when Thorne fell, couldn't hold back. Brotherhood proved stronger than fear. "Get away from our man!" Moretti roared, wading into the melee. His crowbar described a wide arc. Crack! One enforcer flew aside. The young longshoreman fought too, clumsily but with the desperation of men finally getting a chance to avenge humiliation. The balance shifted. Now it was 4 against 4. Delano still writhed on the ground, trying to recover breath. 2 were taken out by Thorne. 1 lay with Moretti's crowbar imprint on his head. But the Newark crew was more experienced, meaner, and they had knives. A young longshoreman cried out, clutching his stomach. Blade entered under ribs. The second backed away, pressing a slashed shoulder. Thorne rose. Blood ran down his legs, soaking his pants, but he was back on his feet, picked up a dropped knife from the ground, looked at Moretti. "Get your boys out. This is my war." The foreman shook his head. "Screw that, Harlan. Started together, finishing together." Thorne smiled faintly at the corner of his mouth. First smile in many years. Nodded, turned toward the remaining enforcers. Then a whistle shrieked, piercing, police issue. Then another, closer, bootsteps on gravel. Someone had finally called the cops. Maybe Watchman Eddie? Maybe someone from nearby houses? The Newark enforcers exchanged glances. A street fight was one thing, cops? Entirely another. Half had records. Descriptions were known. Delano, barely on his feet, rasped, "Scatter!" They ran in different directions, saving their skins, even left their wounded behind. Within a minute, the lot was empty. Remaining were only Thorne, barely standing, 3 bloodied longshoremen, and Opal, still pressed against the freight car. Police arrived 2 minutes later. 3 sergeants with nightsticks at the ready saw the aftermath, exchanged looks. The senior approached Thorne. "What happened to your citizen?" Thorne swayed but stayed upright, looked the sergeant in the eye. "Misunderstanding, officer. Had some drinks. Words were exchanged. Everyone's dispersed now." The sergeant surveyed blood on the ground, torn clothing, obvious signs of brutal combat. But in Thorne's eyes he saw something that made him nod. "I understand. But you should get to a hospital before you bleed out here." The police left. Moretti grabbed Thorne's arm. "Come on, Harlan, to the hospital." But Thorne pulled free, walked to Opal, who still couldn't move from experienced horror, extended a bloodied hand. "Come, I'll see you home." The girl clutched his hand like a drowning person grabbing a lifeline. Only now, with everything over, did she begin shaking. Delayed stress reaction. They walked to the bus stop. Thorne limped, leaving a trail of blood on the dusty road. Opal supported him as best she could, though he weighed twice as much. Moretti and the longshoreman followed behind, ready to catch him if he fell. But Thorne didn't fall. Made it to the bus, helped Opal board, stayed on the step himself. "Go. I'll come later." Only when the bus disappeared around the corner did Harlan Thorne allow himself to collapse. Moretti later recounted, could only tell it at the wake a week later after downing a shot of whiskey, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand and beginning to speak slowly, searching for words as if each came with difficulty. I saw a lot in the war, at Normandy and the Bulge, but what Harlan did in those minutes. He fell silent, shook his head. It was inhuman and simultaneously the most human thing I've ever witnessed. When Thorne collapsed on the bus step, Moretti rushed to him, tried lifting him. Blood flowed from 3 wounds, 2 knife wounds in his side and thigh, and something serious internal from the beating. Thorne opened his eyes, clouded but still conscious. "Sal," he rasped. "They'll come back. Not now. In a day or 2. With reinforcements. For the girl." Moretti swallowed. "I know, Harlan. We won't let them." Thorne shook his head. "You can't stop them. There'll be more and they'll be angrier. I have to finish this." What he meant by finish became clear only later. They rushed Thorne to Johns Hopkins Hospital. Doctors said it was a miracle he'd made it to the bus. Internal bleeding, 3 penetrating wounds, 2 broken ribs, 1 puncturing a lung. Surgery lasted 4 hours. The head surgeon, himself a combat medic, emerged to those waiting and just spread his hands. "We did what we could. Now it's up to his body. But even if he survives, normal walking is unlikely." Opal sat in the hospital corridor all night. Nurses tried sending her home. Useless. She sat on a wooden bench, clutching her handkerchief, staring at one spot. At dawn, Moretti arrived, brought a thermos of coffee and sandwiches, sat beside her. "Don't blame yourself, girl. After the war, Harlan didn't live, he existed. When you appeared, it was like he woke up. First time in 8 years I saw him alive. If something happens, know he chose this. Chose to die human instead of lasting as a ghost." Second day, Thorne regained consciousness, weak but alive. First thing he asked, "The girl?" The nurse smiled. "She's here. Been sitting 2 days straight." Thorne closed his eyes and a tear rolled down his cheek, first in many years. Then he asked, "Call Sal Moretti and someone from the police department." The conversation wasn't long. Thorne spoke with difficulty, frequently pausing to catch his breath, but spoke clearly, military style, about how the Newark crew wouldn't give up, that they had connections in the East Coast syndicate, that sooner or later they'd return, if not them, then others, and Opal would always be under threat. "There's only one way," he rasped. "Remove the top guys, all at once, so others learn not to try." Police Detective Lieutenant Brennan shook his head. "Harlan, you understand I can't sanction." Thorne interrupted. "Don't need to sanction. Just, if something happens, don't search too hard. War veteran, shell-shocked, snapped. Happens." Brennan looked at him long, then nodded. Happens. That night, Thorne vanished from the hospital. How a man with a punctured lung and 3 penetrating wounds could get up and leave remains a mystery. A nurse making rounds at 3 a.m. found the room empty, window open, bed sheets tied into a makeshift rope. They raised the alarm but didn't search. Detective Brennan personally came to the hospital and ordered, "Patient discharged himself against medical advice." That's all. What happened next can only be reconstructed from fragmentary testimonies. Cabby Walter Jenkins recounted that around 4 a.m. a strange passenger flagged him down, pale, bloodied bandages under his shirt. Asked to be driven to the downtown hotel, gave him a 20 and said, "Wait for me 1 hour. If I don't come out, leave and forget you saw me." At the hotel, 4 surviving Newark enforcers occupied rooms, preparing to leave, packing belongings, destroying evidence. planning to catch the first morning train out of Baltimore, lie low, then return with serious backup. At 5 a.m., neighbors heard noise from their rooms, muffled impacts, breaking furniture, a strangled cry. Then silence. Absolute, ringing silence. The janitor, coming at 6 a.m. to sweep the lobby, found the door to their suite open, looked inside, and recoiled. 4 bodies. Delano lay by the window with a slashed throat. The other 3, one with a broken neck, one with a knife in the heart, one with his skull caved in. There'd been almost no struggle. They were killed quickly, professionally, soundlessly, as taught in OSS special schools for deep reconnaissance. On the table lay a note, written in blood. Debt paid. They found Thorne an hour later on a bench in a small park by the inner harbor. He sat leaning against the backrest, gazing at the water. On his lips, a strange, peaceful smile. In his pocket, the photograph, his Marine Raider Battalion from 43, and a folded paper. A letter addressed to Opal Hartley. Police arrived quickly, but doctors only confirmed death. Internal bleeding, exacerbated by physical exertion. Amazing he'd even made it to the park after what he'd done. Detective Brennan personally claimed the body, arranged for military burial. The Newark hotel murders were officially unconnected to Thorne. The report read, "Criminal dispute among visiting elements." Moretti delivered the letter to Opal. Came to her boarding house 3 days after Thorne's death. The girl answered, gaunt, eyes red from tears, silently took the envelope, sat on her bed in the tiny room, unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unsteady. Letters jumped, clearly written by someone in pain with each movement. Opal, when you read this, I'll be gone. Don't cry. I lived 8 extra years after the war, dead among the living. You gave me back 1 month of real life. For that, thank you. In the lockbox under my bed at the boarding house is an envelope. My savings, $1,100. I don't need it anymore. Leave Baltimore, get an education, live for yourself and for all of us who didn't come home from that war. Forgive me for not finding another way. H.T. Opal read it, pressed the letter to her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't sob. She cried quietly, the way adults cry after learning what real loss means. Moretti shuffled awkwardly by the door. Funerals day after tomorrow. Arlington National Cemetery. Pulled strings to get him a plot with other Marines. You coming? The girl nodded, then asked softly, Sal, did he know he'd die? The foreman was quiet, then answered, He knew, girl. Doctors told him, with those wounds, no chance. But he couldn't do otherwise. He understood if the Newark crew stayed alive, they'd come back for you. He chose the only way to protect you forever. Traded his last hours for your years. Arlington National Cemetery, June 7th, 1953. The funeral was modest. Longshoreman from the terminal, several Marines from the recruiting station, Opal. The casket, closed. Thorne had requested it. A Marine captain gave a brief speech about war hero, Silver Star recipient, Marine Raider Harlan James Thorne, about how he took prisoners, how he led his unit from encirclement, how he demolished a bridge behind enemy lines. About the war he spoke. What came after? Not a word. Opal stood by the grave until evening. The longshoremen had long dispersed. Gravediggers filled the hole, set a temporary marker. She kept standing, remembering his awkward care, the can of condensed milk on her desk, silent escort to the bus, his gaze through the dirty office window, and his final look when he stood between her and death, ready to take any blow if it meant she stayed alive. As evening fell, an unfamiliar woman approached, maybe 50, in a black headscarf. "You're Opal?" she asked quietly. The girl nodded. "I'm from that building where the Newark men stayed. Saw what happened that night. Not everything, but enough." She paused, then added, "He went in quiet as a shadow. They didn't wake immediately. When they did, too late. But you know what's strange? He could have killed them in their sleep, but he woke them, gave them a chance to defend themselves. Only they got scared, saw his eyes and got scared. One even fell to his knees begging for mercy. Harlan said just one thing: for the girl, and did what he had to." The woman left, dissolved into dusk. Opal remained alone, stood a while longer, then knelt, placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the fresh grave, the same kind that bloomed in the freight yard lot. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Next day she found the envelope in Thorne's room. $1,100, a fortune by those standards. And another photograph, that one of the Raider Battalion. On back an inscription: "So you remember." Opal stared long at the young faces. Thorne in the center, so different, alive, even smiling slightly. Beside him his comrades, all dead, all who'd given their lives for others. A week later, Opal quit the terminal. Moretti gave her severance, added 50 from his own pocket for travel, hugged her fatherly. Harlan was right. Leave, study, live. And remember, it wasn't for nothing. Hear me? Not for nothing. June 14th, 1953, Pennsylvania Station, New York City, 6 a.m. The platform slowly filled with travelers, some heading on vacation, some on business, some forever. Opal Hartley stood by the third car of the Boston-bound train, gripping her ticket. A small suitcase at her feet, her entire life, 2 dresses, a change of clothes, the Raider Battalion photograph, and Thorne's letter. Nothing else. Only Moretti came to see her off, stood shifting foot to foot, not knowing what to say. Finally managed, "Boston, you got people there? Someone to help you settle?" Opal shook her head. "I'll find something. Harlan left money, enough to start." Moretti nodded, reached into his inner pocket, pulled out a folded paper. "Here's an address. My cousin Irene lives in Boston, works at a hospital. Irene Moretti on Beacon Hill. Tell her I sent you. She'll help you find your feet." The locomotive's first whistle blew. People hurried toward cars. Opal picked up her suitcase, stepped toward the boarding platform, turned back. "Sal, visit his grave sometimes, so it doesn't get overgrown." The foreman waved his hand. "What do you think, girl? Our guys from the terminal go every Sunday now, taking turns. Harlan, he stood up for all of us, not just you, for the right to work honest without bowing to thugs. He proved it's possible, that not everything in this country is bought and sold yet." Second whistle. Opal boarded, found her seat. 4 fellow passengers, a family with 2 children, made room, giving her the window seat. The train started moving, slowly, with a screech, gaining speed. Opal pressed her forehead to the glass, watching Baltimore recede, the city that took from her the last person she'd grown close to, but also gave her a chance at a new life, purchased with another's life. Those who knew this story said that in those days Terminal 7 changed, as if Thorne's death broke something in people. Longshoremen stopped paying protection to small gangs, banded together, created a kind of mutual aid association. If anyone got harassed, they answered collectively. Within a month, the terminal became known in criminal circles as untouchable, not worth the trouble. Criminals avoided it. And Thorne's story spread among people, accumulating details, some invented, some exaggerated, but the essence remained. A man broken by war found strength for one final battle, not for country, not for flag, but for a girl who reminded him he was human. This story gave hope to other veterans who couldn't find their place in peacetime. It showed that their war wasn't over, just that now the enemy was different. Boston, 1958. Massachusetts General Hospital, night shift in surgical ward. Dr. Opal Hartley leaned over the operating table. 5th hour of surgery. Complex case, young construction worker fell from scaffolding. Multiple trauma, internal bleeding. Slim chances, but she didn't give up. Never gave up. Surgical residents marveled at her endurance, ability to stand at the table for hours, fighting for every seemingly hopeless life. They didn't know that in such moments she remembered another person, one who bled out in a freight yard but kept fighting, one who rose from a hospital bed with a punctured lung to finish what he started, one who traded his last hours for her years. That memory gave her strength. Always gave her strength. "Clamp," she commanded in a tired voice. "A little longer. He'll survive. Has to survive." And the patient survived, as hundreds of others had in her 5 years of practice. Colleagues whispered behind her back, "Hartley has an impossible success rate with hopeless cases. Like death itself backs down from her." Only the chief of surgery, old Professor Cohen, understood. Once caught her in the doctor's lounge going through old photographs. He saw the Raider Battalion picture, asked cautiously if someone close was in it. Opal nodded. "My father. Not biological, but my father." In 1960, she received a promotion, became head of emergency surgery. Youngest department head in Boston. They offered her a research position, academic career. She refused. "My place is here, at the operating table, where it's decided whether a person lives or dies." Nobody understood the choice. Science, career, opportunity to break into medical elite. She rejected it all for exhausting daily work in emergency surgery. Opal never married. There were suitors. A beautiful, intelligent woman couldn't help attracting attention, but she turned them all down. Gently but firmly. Friends tried setting her up with promising men. Useless. Only once, on VJ Day celebration, after drinking to the fallen, Opal let slip, "I already had my man. The only one. He gave his life for me. After that, all others seem too small." Every year on June 7th, she took leave, traveled to Washington, to Arlington National Cemetery. Thorne's grave changed over the years. The wooden cross was replaced by a granite headstone. Terminal Longshoreman had chipped in. Engraved on the granite, Harlan James Thorne, 1910 to 1953. Marine Raider. Hero. Nothing more needed. Those who should know, knew. The rest didn't need to. Opal brought wildflowers, the same kind that grew in the Baltimore freight yards, sat on a bench by the grave and told him about saved lives, about the young lieutenant she'd pulled from death's door after a car crash, who named his son Harlan, about the girl she'd performed complex heart surgery on, now running and laughing, about hundreds of large and small victories over death. "I'm paying the debt, Harlan," she'd say quietly. "Every day I'm paying it. I know I'll never fully repay. My one life against hundreds saved still doesn't compare to the one given for me. But I'm trying. Honestly trying." Massachusetts General Hospital, 1995. Dr. Opal Hartley worked in surgery for 42 years. Saved, by conservative estimates, over 3,000 people. Many later brought their children, grandchildren to her. Entire dynasties of her patients formed. In the 80s, they wanted to nominate her for the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She declined. "I don't work for awards." Opal Hartley died in 1997, quietly, in her sleep, in her Beacon Hill apartment. On her bedside table lay 2 photographs, the Raider Battalion from 43 and Thorne's grave at Arlington. Her will requested burial in Washington beside Thorne. the request was fulfilled. Her patients, by then influential people, secured permission. Engraved on her headstone, Opal Jane Hartley, 1934 to 1997. Physician. Saved thousands. Below, in smaller letters, at her personal request, debt paid. Those who knew this story said, "There's a love that needs no words or embraces. Love as duty, love as memory, love as service." Harlan Thorne gave Opal life. She answered by living that life, so his sacrifice wasn't in vain. 3,000 saved lives. That's proof that one person can change the world, even if it requires giving your own life. Harlan Thorne and Opal Hartley's story never made official chronicles, never became a book or film, but it lived in people's memory. In Terminal 7 Longshoreman's tales to their children, in Dr. Hartley's patients' recollections, in Baltimore underworld legends about the Marine who single-handedly destroyed 2 gangs. This story proved one thing. Even in the darkest times, people exist ready to stand for what's right. And while such people exist, there's hope. In 2015, at the site of former Terminal 7, they built a shopping center. During demolition of old warehouses, workers found a metal box under the office floor. Inside, documents and a note. The documents, invoices, manifests from May 1953. Nothing special. But the note? Just a few words in feminine handwriting. Here worked a man who proved that good is stronger than evil. Always stronger, even when the price is the highest one can pay. They transferred the box to the Baltimore Historical Society. There it sits in storage. Small testimony to a great story. A story about how a former Marine raider saved a girl at the cost of his own life, and how that girl then spent her life saving others, repaying a debt impossible to repay. A debt of love, debt of memory, debt of survival.